This is the hardest LEGO model I've ever put together. Thanks for tuning into Duck Bricks. I'm Chris, and today we're going to be taking a look at this 3,000 piece, absolutely incredible LEGO spaceship. But before we do that, let's jump back in time and take a look at some of the LEGO spaceships they've made from level 1 to level 100 leading up to this incredible custom creation. Ever since the very first LEGO classic spaceship in 1978 all the way up to today, LEGO has been making spaceships over and over again, some more complex than others. From Futuron, Galaxy Squad, Blacktron, Alien Conquest, Mars Mission, Life on Mars, all of the classic sci-fi themes, to even some realistic spacecraft and NASA launch shuttles today, there is no lack of spaceships in LEGO's current portfolio. In fact, 2024 is a focus year for space for the LEGO Group, and they're putting out even more spaceships than ever before. And that's not even beginning to count the multitude of spaceships made for LEGO Star Wars. But just as there are a ton of official LEGO set spaceships, there are equally as many, if not infinitely more, custom LEGO creations, where the LEGO MOC, or My Own Creation community, has really come together to give us some absolutely phenomenal custom LEGO spaceship MOCs. And it's one of those ones that we'll be taking a look at today, because this is the hardest LEGO build that I personally have ever had the chance to put together myself. And so, atomic batteries to power, turbines to speed, let's take our spaceship and blast off, because it's time to take a look at the coolest LEGO spaceship model I've ever had the chance to build and display in my LEGO collection. So this is the Spaceship Interference. It's a LEGO model built by LEGO mockist Nick Trotta, who goes by Galactic Plastics Online, one of the most talented builders that I personally have ever seen, utilizing LEGO bricks to accomplish shapes that I never would have been able to figure out myself using just a LEGO brick. Even during my time on LEGO Masters, I never came close to anything like this, and that's why I feel like this was such a great learning experience to put this together, figure out how all of the angles and shapes came together to form some of the most dynamic curves and angles I've ever seen on any model, and learn a thing or two in the process. So how exactly was this made? Well, thankfully, Nick Trotta has not only provided YouTube videos talking through the build process on his channel, but he's also provided studio models as well as a parts list in order to be able to buy the parts yourself. If you don't know what Studio is, it is basically a digital design platform in which you can use to create your own LEGO creations piece by piece, or share and build other people's. Studio has been developed by Bricklink, which is the secondhand marketplace for LEGO, which actually is owned by LEGO themselves, making it a really great tool. It's fan-made, fan-run, but actually owned and operated by LEGO, making it pretty much the ubiquitous and perfect LEGO digital design software, especially after LEGO themselves retired their own LEGO digital designer years ago. So how exactly was this pieced together? Well, step one was ordering the pieces. Once I took the finished model, I chose not to go for the custom chromed elements because, while I think it would have improved the look and feel of the ship, I just really didn't want to have to figure out how to custom chrome a lot of pieces, and so thankfully Studio has a very clever feature where you can go to Color Validator and click Auto Fix, where if there are pieces that exist in the model that don't actually exist as legitimate LEGO parts, you can hit Auto Fix and it essentially just picks the right color closest in the LEGO palette that they should be. Once I did that, I went ahead and signed into my Bricklink account on Studio and clicked Order Pieces. Once my pieces made their way into a wanted list, I had the option to go ahead and purchase them all, and after Bricklink thought for a very long time, it finally was able to auto-select some stores, bringing the total cost of this model without shipping to only around $170. To caveat this, I did have to spend a little bit more than that. Obviously, with shipping, especially from overseas, it was a little bit more expensive to get stuff from European and Asian LEGO stores, but the other thing is that there are a lot of ways that I could actually price optimize. Certain pieces were a lot cheaper on LEGO's own parts ordering service, Pick-a-Brick, so I was able to optimize my cart based on those really expensive pieces that I just wasn't able to all get from Bricklink, or the ones that were just super expensive on Bricklink. But then, once the parts arrived, I was in for the hardest building challenge, I think, of my life, and I do not put this lightly. As I said in the video thumbnail and title, This was the most challenging and hardest LEGO build I have ever embarked on, and I would be hard pressed to find something more challenging than this. Now, what's really awesome is that the original designer for this MOC made use of a ton of interesting multicolored pieces when actually putting the model together. While the finished model obviously doesn't showcase any of these crazy colors, this was invaluable to actually piecing it together, because if the interior was just like all black or all gray or all one color, let me tell you, it would be incredibly hard to put it together. The downside, though, is that sure, some pieces are more expensive than others, and the usage of all these crazy colors on the inside makes it a little bit harder to purchase the pieces, especially because some colors are a lot rarer and more expensive, but personally, I would say it is really, really worth it. And for the very few pieces where it just legitimately did not make financial sense to purchase multiple copies of them in weird colors, like for instance the magenta 1x1 studs on the side brackets, I just went ahead and swapped them out for light gray, and you can do that in Studio, making it super easy for you to optimize the build based on how comfortable you are with the building process, as well as how many different types of pieces you would want to use. Now, moving into the build process itself, while it may seem incredibly daunting to put together a model like this, I have to say it actually was a lot simpler than I first imagined. Sure, there were all sorts of crazy building techniques, and don't get me wrong, it was really hard to put a lot of it together, but the real simplicity in the design came to the way that the studio file was set up. Nick was able to actually break up each and every single component into very easily digestible chunks, and from there you basically just had to mirror almost everything you were building for the left and right side. It does require some amount of spatial understanding and being able to visualize things in 3D to build the mirror and reverse image of something, but if you're able to get that, as long as you have some LEGO building experience, I will say the build was really enjoyable, and it definitely was the most educational build for me in a long time. Here's an example of breaking it down into sections. You can see that the cockpit is split up into cockpit A, B, and C. Cockpit A is split up into even more subparts, cockpit AA, cockpit AB, and cockpit AC, and even on this other section, cockpit B also has cockpit BA, BB, BC, BD, and so on and so forth, and you basically can break it down into more and more digestible chunks until, if you want to go down to the very base levels, it will go literally piece by piece. And so, while there are not actually instructions provided for this, which I'm sure would be a Herculean effort, and I don't think anybody would ever want to undertake that gargantuan task, it wasn't too hard to just sit in my laptop, lay out all the pieces, and try to play around with this thing in Studio. It was overall an incredible build process, again, a lot of fun, very educational, and it was just really interesting seeing how everything came together. Now, one thing that I do want to note as we move into the review of the actual build, when I first was actually putting this together, I actually had a pretty big concern. A lot of the times when you're building some crazy MOCs like this and putting together pieces in weird connections, and definitely a lot of illegal connections here as well, one of the biggest fears that I have is that the final product is going to be pretty unstable. And thankfully, I'm incredibly happy to report that that was absolutely not the case for this model. The model, as you saw at the beginning of the video, and even right now, is very swooshable. You can swing it around, you can fly it, as long as you have a good grip on the bottom of the model, you can really fly this around and treat it like a play model, which is not something you can do with a lot of these crazy LEGO MOCs. Now, obviously, is this as stable as an official LEGO set? No, not at all, by any means. There are pieces that will fall off, and I'm very, very gentle with it still, even while swooshing it around, but it holds itself together, and it is a lot more stable than I initially thought it would be, so I have to give it credit for that. But now, I think it's time we actually dive into a look at the model itself, and I'm going to be talking through this model in the general order that I actually built the model in, from the cockpit to the front wings, the back wings, and finally to the engines. This is truly a work of art. So starting off with the cockpit here, one of the most clever things it actually does is take the UCS X-Wing canopy, aka the Benny's spaceship canopy, and turns it not only on its side but also at a diagonal angle. I actually recolored this from the original proposal in the original mock from transparent black or transparent brown into the trans yellow color to kind of bring it a little bit more into that classic space kind of vibe, and personally I figured with the blue, the gray, and the whites, this just fit right in with a trans yellow windscreen. Now, the really cool thing about the cockpit is that, again, since you're using those gigantic windscreen pieces at unique angles, you get a lot of interesting detail being added into the cockpit itself. While a minifigure with air tanks sadly cannot fit in there, I just went ahead and removed the air tanks of a classic space red-suited pilot, and you can see that even right down to the controls there are unique pieces being used, like the mountain climber pick elements being used as the control levers of the actual spaceship. Of course, you have some of the clip to bar component elements being used for the control panel, and even brown coloration for the seat with a tan ingot behind the passenger head, because you want to make sure the pilot is comfortable after all. Now, the shaping of the cockpit is incredibly well done, and I'm really impressed by the usage of studs on the side pieces snaking both around the sides of the cockpit but also on the top of the cockpit to really make it achieve the angles it's going for. It's the usage of these pieces in a completely unique way that is very different to what you would normally see them being used like in a normal LEGO set that really makes it stand out. And there's even detail packed into the underside of the ship as well, which is really the most robust place to hold the ship. As long as you have a steady hand on the sides of the ship, everything is bound together by parts studded on their sides, and the core of the ship itself, which is kind of the black and gray component I have in my hand right here, is the strongest part of the ship. Those ingots are not just for show, they are absolutely holding this thing together, and it is really cool being able to swoosh this around and fly it around and kind of swing it in pretty aggressive angles and have everything hold itself together thanks to the strength of the main cockpit. Now, the way they're able to achieve this is by making a lot of the other pieces of the ship deceptively light, and that kind of brings us to the front wings and the prongs. This is a Vic Viper, or some sort of a Vic Viper after all, so they do have to have this sort of construction being used here, and this is one of the most clever pieces of construction in the entire set, where for this side wing, you have parts mounted at an angle that literally are just sitting in there due to friction with the bracket elements being used to hold them in. Again, a lot of crazy building techniques went into making this full-on model, and even as we move on to the front prongs, I'm just incredibly impressed by all sorts of different directions you can see the bricks going. Now, there is one thing you do have to note. This is absolutely one of those models where the types of mold of the age of the pieces matters. Occasionally, LEGO will change the type of mold they use for seemingly identical pieces, but sometimes that can cause some problems when trying to use these in weird and interesting ways for mocks, but thankfully the studio parts list does actually list out the exact correct pieces you should use, so as long as you purchase those, you should have no problem. That is evidently apparent in the front prongs, where the usage of the 90-degree panel elements are used to great effect to hold in certain pieces, which is a really smart building technique. Moving forwards to the front of the model itself and the two front prongs, one of my favorite details has got to be the Technic pin to stud converters being used as engine details, which just add a lot more to the detailing and greebling of the model itself and really do make it stand out. I also really love how the color scheme is done, where the underside of the model is more utilitarian. You can see bars and clips and mechanical detail being used in grays and blacks and dark grays on the bottom, but on the top of the ship, a lot of it has been redefined to be a lot more sleek with a blue and azure and white color scheme, making it feel that much more realistic, or at least realistic in a sci-fi setting, where you can just see the difference in building techniques from the bottom to the top, with the top being incredibly sleek and clean, and the bottom being made up of purposefully different detailed elements to make it feel that much more mechanically rich. It's a building technique that LEGO doesn't often employ in their own sets, but it's something that really works out well for this model here. Of course, I think it's time to move on to the back wings here, because this was one of the most interesting pieces to actually put together for the mock itself. First off, love the usage of these specialized greeble elements on the insides of the engine intakes here, suggesting that there's a lot more mechanical detail as you move onto the inside of the model itself. And one of my other favorite details is the usage of 3 different shades of yellow, Keyed Orange or Flame Yellowish Orange, regular yellow, and cool yellow, to actually have a gradient in the racing stripes atop the model itself. Another interesting technique that you can notice in some of these wing elements that will become very apparent once we move on to the back fin is that they've specifically used the gaps between certain geometries of pieces to take advantage of those gaps and purposefully leave a little bit of stud gappage in between certain elements just to add some lines to the model itself. It's a very subtle effect, and it's something that you really have to know and understand deeply how the geometries of certain studs in the side pieces work to pull it off, but when you pull it off in a cohesive and solid manner like this, it just feels so unique and different compared to a lot of other LEGO building techniques. And again, there it is being used on the fin there, where you have those very slight gaps in between the plates where you can just see the studs acting as some sort of a mechanical detail on the insides of the fin itself. Moving onwards to the final part of the back of the model here, you'll notice the way the engines are built are also using studs in all sorts of crazy directions. And do not let the smoothness of some of these engines fool you. The amount of insane studs in the side techniques being used to pull this off are honestly legendary, and I'd recommend you either check out the actual YouTube videos that the original mockist put together, Galactic Plastics, posted to go through the construction of these builds, linked in the description below if you want to learn more about how this all comes together, or heck, even go to his website and download the studio file. I promise it will be an incredibly educating experience whether or not you even order the parts to build it or no. All being said, this is easily the most complex model I have ever made. The complexity and detail of this model blows pretty much anything else I've ever done out of the water. Even some of the most complex Technic mechanisms do not even rival the complexity and craziness in building techniques being used here, where even for a tiny mechanism or a tiny little sub-assembly, studs are being arranged in all sorts of crazy directions, left, right, up, down, sideways, you name it. This is truly one of the most complex and enriching builds of all time, and I would say if anyone is interested in getting more into LEGO mocking, to understanding how pieces work, as someone who just came out of LEGO Masters, I want to do more mocks myself. I'm in the process of getting my parts sorted. This was the perfect build for me to actually put together and learn how the pieces all come together. All in all, I hope this was a fairly informative video for you to be able to take a look at one of my favorite LEGO models I've ever had the joy of putting together, and be sure to check out Galactic Plastics for more. I've linked them in the description below, and I cannot wait to see what they do next. That sums up our look at this incredible spaceship by Galactic Plastics. Go ahead and check them out down in the description below. I hope you enjoyed this look at an expert level LEGO mock. And thanks for watching this video. Be sure to like and subscribe for even more LEGO news, reviews, discussion, and analyses coming your way very soon. Thank you so much, and bye for now.